The bike is critical, but so am I. That wasn't a complaint. That was a confession complete with a timestamp. Because Mark is losing races at the finish line, yet he is actually losing them long before the race even properly begins. 3 rounds in and 0 podiums. A sprint win that proved he still has teeth, followed by Sundays where the fight is already over by lap 3. Marco Bezzecchi didn't simply beat him at COTA, he erased him from the equation before Mark's race had even started. That is the true cost, not positions, not points, control. COTA exposed it all in slow motion. The crash in practice wasn't merely a mistake, it was the body failing to find the margin it once trusted without question. The sprint collision with Fabio Di Giannantonio wasn't aggression. It was pure instinct arriving before the machine and the body could fully support it. A long lap penalty followed, sending him back into traffic. The old Mark lived for those moments. This Mark has to survive them. He fought Bagnaia, he passed Bastianini. He climbed all the way to P5 like a man proving something to himself, but the front group was already gone. Bezzecchi was leading, Martin was already managing the race. The race had moved on without him. Mark arrived late to his own war. Francesco Bagnaia outqualified him on the exact same bike. That is not just a statistic, that is a fundamental shift. The factory gave both riders the same weapon. One rider put it on the front rows, the other started behind the fight. Mark has built an entire career on controlling the opening phase. Now he finds himself reacting to it. That is not adaptation, that is damage control, and damage control doesn't win titles, it only limits how much you lose. Juan Martinez saw the overtakes and said the DNA is still intact. He's right. Mark can still pass riders in places where nobody else even tries. He can still read gaps that don't exist for anyone else, but DNA no longer decides races, sequence does. The first 3 laps decide who controls the race, and right now Mark is not part of that sequence. He is forced to rebuild it from behind. Every overtake becomes evidence of what he still is. Every lap spent chasing becomes evidence of what he no longer controls. Look at the numbers nobody wants to say out loud. Bezzecchi with 5 consecutive wins and 121 laps led without a single interruption. That is not simply pace, that is occupation. When the lights go out, he owns the race. Mark, meanwhile, is negotiating entry into a race that is already under someone else's control. Late race pace that matches Bezzecchi doesn't save him, it exposes him because it proves the speed was always there, the control was not. The shoulder is not just a storyline, it is a cost. Mandalika didn't only injure Mark, it removed the last millimeter, the one that once let him attack lap 1 without thinking. Now there is hesitation, it may not be visible, it may not be admitted, but it is there in the opening laps where he looks tight instead of fluid. Martinez said it himself, not completely relaxed. That is the difference between leading and chasing, between deciding and reacting, between controlling the race and merely surviving it. And Ducati knows it. They built the GP26 to be aggressive on entry, front-end loaded, demanding total commitment. That bike does not wait for a rider to feel comfortable, it punishes hesitation. Bagnaia spent an entire year saying the same thing about the GP25. Nobody listened. Now Mark is saying it. And instead of solving the issue, Ducati handed him a machine that requires exactly what his body is still negotiating: full trust, full commitment from lap 1. That is not a setup issue, that is a structural mismatch. Pedro Acosta is already sitting third in the standings. Fabio Di Giannantonio took pole at COTA and finished ahead of Mark in Brazil. Jorge Martin is executing races like a metronome. And Bezzecchi, he is not racing them, he is removing them from the equation entirely. Mark is not losing to one single rider, he is losing to a system that punishes any delay in control, and right now he is delayed. The most dangerous lie circulating in the paddock is that this is just a slow start, that once Mark aligns all the details, everything will simply return to normal. That is comfort, not analysis. Because alignment does not give you back the opening phase, alignment does not restore the first lap instinct that commits before the gap even exists, alignment does not change the fact that races are decided before Mark finds his rhythm. By the time he becomes Mark again, the race already belongs to someone else, and that changes everything. Races are no longer won on Sunday, they are decided in the first 3 laps. And Ducati built a bike that demands total commitment in precisely the phase Marc Marquez cannot fully give right now. That is the mechanism, not bad luck, not rust, design. The GP26 is not a neutral machine. It is front-end aggressive, entry-loaded, built to reward riders who attack immediately and punish those who need even a single lap to feel their way in. Bagnaia told Ducati this last year: front-end instability, lack of trust on new tires, no control in the opening phase. He said it publicly, he said it repeatedly. Ducati called it adaptation, then they doubled down on the same philosophy. Now Marc is riding the evolution of that decision, and the cost is visible in every opening lap he fails to control. COTA made it undeniable: fresh tires, full grip, the exact phase where races are decided. Marc wasn't fluid. Martinez saw it: tight lines, delayed commitment. The bike asking for more than the body is currently ready to give. That is not a riding issue, that is a mismatch between what the machine demands and the rider's current physical state. The GP26 wants instinct without hesitation. Marc is still negotiating the last millimeter that Mandalika took from him. The result: the bike doesn't turn when he needs it to, the front doesn't give him the confidence to commit fully, and the race leaves him behind before he can fix it. Bagnaia exposed the same flaw from the other side. He led the sprint, controlled the early phase, then dropped back. Why? Because the same front end that demands aggression early becomes unpredictable the moment conditions change. Ducati didn't build a stable platform, they built a weapon with a narrow window: hit it perfectly and it flies, miss it slightly and it collapses. Marc is missing it early, Bagnaia is losing it mid-race. Different symptoms, same machine. And while Ducati is fighting its own design, Aprilia removed the problem entirely. Bezzecchi doesn't negotiate with his bike, he dictates to it from lap 1, every single race. 5 consecutive wins, 121 laps led, not because he is faster in the final phase but because he never gives the race a chance to become a fight. Clean air, controlled braking, stable front. He doesn't need to find rhythm, he starts with it. That is not rider magic, that is system alignment. Jorge Martin saw it before anyone else. He left Ducati after winning a title because he understood the direction was wrong, not slower, wrong. Aprilia gave him a machine that allows execution from the very first lap. Ducati gave Marc a machine that requires adaptation before execution can even begin. In modern MotoGP, that kind of delay is fatal. Look at the pattern: nobody wants to connect. Marc with fast late pace but no early control. Bagnaia with early control but no sustained stability. Ducati with speed everywhere but control nowhere. That is not 3 separate problems, that is one single design decision manifesting in 3 different ways. Ducati chased peak performance, Aprilia built controllability, and with the regulations freezing the engines, there is no reset, no escape. The platform you chose is the war you fight for the entire season. Pedro Acosta is exploiting it. He doesn't wait. He attacks the opening phase because his KTM allows him to. Di Giannantonio took pole at COTA because one-lap commitment still exists, but races aren't one lap, races are sequence, and Ducati is losing that sequence before the tires have even settled. The paddock keeps calling this alignment as if it's just a setup issue waiting to be solved. It is not. It is structural. You cannot align a machine that demands something the rider cannot consistently deliver. You either change the rider or change the machine. Ducati did neither. They handed the same philosophy to a rider who is still recovering from an injury that specifically affects the exact phase the bike demands the most. That is not misfortune, that is inevitability. And here is the part nobody wants to admit: Marc's DNA is intact, the overtakes prove it. The late pace proves it. The instincts are still there, but the system he is inside is built to reward something he cannot fully access yet: instant lap 1 authority. Every lap he spends finding rhythm is a lap Bezzecchi spends building a gap that cannot be closed. Every overtake Marc makes is a correction of a problem the leader never had to face. Ducati didn't lose performance. They engineered a condition where their riders arrive late to their own races, while Aprilia built a machine that never arrives late at all. The verdict is already written. Marc Marquez is not fighting for control of races, he is fighting for entry into them, and the championship does not wait for late arrivals. 3 rounds, 36 points down. That number doesn't look fatal in April, it becomes irreversible by summer, because the man leading this championship is not trading wins, he is removing variables. Marco Bezzecchi has led 121 consecutive laps. Not one rider has taken control from him mid-race. Not one interruption. That is not form, that is ownership of the race structure itself, and Marc is not inside that structure. Every unused piece of data points in the same direction. Marc matched Bezzecchi's pace in the final phase at COTA. That should have been a warning to the entire grid. Instead, it became a warning about Marc. Because it proved something worse than being slow. It proved he had the speed and still couldn't access the race. The leader didn't beat him, the sequence did. By the time Marc reached Bezzecchi's pace, the gap was already built. The race was already decided. That door does not reopen. Francesco Bagnaia sits in the same garage on the same machine, suffering a different kind of collapse. Qualified ahead, led phases, finished P10. That is not a bad race. That is a machine exposing its rider the moment conditions move outside its narrow window. Ducati has two riders. One cannot control the opening phase, the other cannot sustain the middle. And the championship is being run by a rider who controls both without interruption. That is not competition, that is displacement. Pedro Acosta sits third in the standings with a KTM that was supposed to be inconsistent. Fabio Di Giannantonio has a pole and consistent front-running presence. Jorge Martin is executing races without errors. Every one of them has one thing Marc does not have right now: immediate integration into the race from lap 1. They don't need recovery rides, they don't need late surges, they start inside the fight. Marc starts outside it. And the penalties are not random events. The long lap at COTA came from committing to a gap that did not exist. That is the old instinct trying to operate inside a new limitation. The body is not fully ready. The bike demands it anyway. That gap between instinct and execution is exactly where the championship is bleeding out. Every time Marc has to correct, the front group extends the advantage. Every time he re-enters, the race has already moved on. That is not a riding error. That is a system rejecting his current state. Ducati's decision is now locked. Engine freeze, no radical shift possible. The GP26 is the platform for the entire season. The same front-end demand, the same narrow operating window, the same requirement for immediate authority. Marc will get stronger physically, that is inevitable. But will it be enough to recover the one phase where the championship is being decided? Because Bezzecchi is not waiting for that answer. He is building a points gap that does not require Marc to be beaten, only delayed. And this is where the narrative breaks. DNA intact is not a solution, it is a distraction. It tells you what Marc still is, it hides what the system no longer allows him to do. You can have the instincts, you can have the pace, you can have the aggression, but if you do not control the opening phase, you do not control the race. And if you do not control the race, you do not control the championship. This is not about whether Marc can win races later in the season. It is about whether the championship will still be alive when he finally arrives on lap 1. Because right now the pattern is not fluctuation, it is a chain. He starts behind, he recovers late, the leader escapes early, that chain does not break itself. So the real question is not whether Marc Marquez's DNA is intact. It is this: if the fastest rider in the field cannot access the first 3 laps, what exactly is he competing for by the time he reaches the pace he used to start with? GP24 doesn't cover MotoGP, we cover its war.